Hoi! Hi guys, today I'm here with Maria Postema.
Hi, I'm Maria Postema. I'm a Dutch translator. I live in Utrecht, in the Netherlands. We are here in Utrecht. And you see some of my books right here. I do mostly YA and some middle grade. I did The Hunger Games, I translated Twilight, all from English to Dutch of course. I did Divergent, which is called Inwijding in Dutch. And Jason Reynolds, which is a long way down, 67 seconds in Dutch. All American Boys. And my recent project is a modern translation of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley.
Which I'm very excited about because it's one of my favourite classics. Yes. So I think my first question is going to be about Frankenstein.
I'm very happy with Frankenstein, so I'm totally cool to talk about it. And I also write books myself, also YA with my co-author Maarten Bruns, which is the first one is 13 Dag, which came out about a year ago, more I think. And our new book is coming in autumn of 2019, so this year.
So you guys sent in a bunch of questions. I have some questions of my own. I'm just gonna get straight into them. And the first one is directly about Frankenstein.
Okay, cool.
And it is, what's the difference between translating a classic and a YA book?
Oh, lots of differences actually. The thing with this one is that it's not a literal translation. I had a lot of freedom in this because it's directed at a YA audience.
Yeah.
And of course Frankenstein is from 1818, so a lot of 19th century English. And the assignment was basically, okay, write a modern version of Frankenstein. So of course use the original story, but use more modern language and make it an easy read.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that it's like a children's book or anything, but it's more
accessible.
Easy read. Exactly. So it was really nice to do because I had to read a lot of what Mary did and do a lot of research and see what I wanted to keep and what I could leave out. Yeah.
Were there any older Dutch translations that you had a look at and used at all?
No, I didn't, because I didn't want to be influenced by other people's work. So I did read a lot of annotated versions from there are two editions of Frankenstein, 1818 and 1831.
Yeah.
So I read that and lots of different versions, but didn't read a Dutch version. Okay. No, because I didn't want to secretly be influenced.
Were there a lot of Dutch translations already?
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
From 100 years ago to very recent ones.
Okay, so we're gonna go to some questions from people on Instagram. I'm gonna try and pronounce these usernames. The first one is by Maria, and she says, "How long does it take to translate a book?"
Well, that depends on, of course, how many pages and the difficulty of a certain book. So middle grade books are usually slightly easier to translate. So I would say right now, because I'm a pretty fast worker, between a month and like maximum 6 months.
Okay.
Like half a year, but that's a lot. Breaking Dawn is like huge. That's like 120,000 words or more. That was a lot. I think that has been maybe half a year, 5 months. And like a regular Twilight would be, for me now, 3 months.
So would you sit down on any given day and then just start translating and then go back and try and do more details? Or how does it kind of work?
Like that. I always try to read the book first to see if there are any puns or any, names that are going to be difficult or the things I should worry about already. Yeah. So I can do that and get a sense of the general story, of course. So I first read it and then I sit down and open the book and just go. And of course in the first draft you have lots of question marks and I always mark it in red and maybe give different options that I think, okay, could be this, could be that, think about this later. And there's always stuff going on in my mind that I have to, thinking about what should I do there. Right. And then that's the first draft and then go over it like at least 3 times, sometimes more. And every draft is more towards the end results.
And do you feel like, because obviously it's a freelance job, do you feel like you often have to really pick up the pace and go quite quickly, or do you feel like you have enough time to, depends obviously per book, but...
Also depends, but usually the deadlines are pretty tight. Okay. So it's always like one eye on the clock.
Okay. fair enough. Then a question from Miss Prongs, and she says, do you tend to localize scenes or keep the original? It's not just scenes, but I guess moments, food, words. Again, it's different per book, but do you have a tendency to do one more than the other?
Well, for YA, you usually keep it in the original state, and every teenager knows that the UK is different from the Netherlands, so you can't just say, oh, London is Amsterdam now. It just doesn't work that way.
I read a book where they did that once.
They did?
I read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in Dutch, and I think it said something like a small town like close to Amsterdam. That's what I remember, because I remember being like,
it could be, but I'm going to look at it. Used to be more common actually. So if it's a translation from like the 60s, then it's definitely possible. But nowadays
you wouldn't do that anymore.
Wouldn't do that anymore. But for children's books, I sometimes do. Because like a 9-year-old in the Netherlands doesn't know anything about like
the
small
world outside.
Cities. So it depends. I did a story about Ireland the other day for like 10-year-olds, and I kept everything Irish, and because it's the scene, it's very important to the story, to just keep it that way, keep the names that way. But sometimes if it's just a funny story for 8-year-olds and there's one town mentioned, then I would probably use a Dutch town. Yes.
Cool. I guess this is a similar question, which you already answered, but I'm going to mention anyway, which is Mahani. It says, do you ever change the names of characters to make them work in Dutch? So for YA, would you ever change names at all?
I did change the name, which is still sort of a point of discussion in my own head.
Controversial.
Because in the Hunger Games I changed the name of Effie Trinket, because Trinket is such a, it actually means something.
Right.
One of the few names actually that really means something in the Hunger Games, and I changed that to Effie Prul.
Okay.
Because that is actually what it means, and it fits her character so much. I doubted it for a long time, and if I had known that the Hunger Games would be so big and the movies would be so big,
and then the people would be watching the movies with the English names.
I don't know if I would have done that, but I'm still, I'm behind. My decision is okay, I think, because that's her name.
Yes.
For me. So that is one of the only things I've changed in YA, and for like middle grade, we usually change the names. Because also it depends on what the publisher wants. Because sometimes
do they have strong opinions of that?
Sometimes they do, and sometimes I think that the English names are okay, and then the publisher says no, we want more Dutch names or a bit of Dumblish names somewhere in between.
Jadeling97, and this is a question I'm really interested in as well, is how much of your own writing style and voice goes into it?
Impossible to not use your own voice, I think, in translating, and I always say if you give a book to 10 different translators, then you will have 10 different versions. Everybody has their own words they prefer, or their own style, but you have to be careful that it doesn't become your own book, because you have to be the author. You are the author's voice. So if the author uses words that you might not use, you cannot change too much of it. So of course you have your own preferences and your own style, and I do think that for me, for instance, dialogues, I always like to make them like, I always ask myself, okay, how do you say it in Dutch?
Okay.
And that is, I think, what makes people always say your translations, they read so smoothly, and they're, I sometimes...
Because it matches the Dutch pace.
Yeah, so it's always in my head, like, what do we say in Holland? Yes, sometimes I do not like an author's style, it happens, but I cannot change it, because I'm just a vessel for the author.
Yeah, exactly. Then I want to go to some kind of like best of or most interesting of things. So what was the most, or like one of the most difficult things you've had to translate, so whether it was a name or a situation or a word?
Every book has difficult words or puns. Puns are always difficult, of course, but very nice. And I think one of the most difficult things actually was in the Hunger Games, and because that's one of the things I've been thinking about a long time. And it might be a surprise, but it was the reaping. The reaping is where they, the lottery where they draw the names and the tributes of all the different districts, they come up. And the reaping has such a lot of meaning in it, because the reaping is, you reap what you sow, and the reaping is what you harvest, basically, but it also has a sort of biblical connotation.
Right.
And the reaping, you immediately think of the Grim Reaper, you know, the death itself.
Right.
Is
Like, how am I
coming.
going to get all those?
Yeah, exactly. And usually there are words that you think, okay, it's like that, you know. But it was so hard to come up with a word that has also the biblical, you know, sense and the because the Dutch word for harvest is really positive, oogst.
Yeah.
It's really, you have like, it's like a party, and we all have like fruits, and end of summer is here. So you couldn't use that. In the end, I came up with the boete, which is a Dutch word. But it's also like a thyme, and that is a bit flat, you know. But it also has a really like a biblical sense of like.
It's like repaying your sins.
Repaying your sins. So sins is really, and the tributes in Roman times were the taxes you had the people had to pay for the Roman oppressors. And boete really implies that as well. So it's really like paying your oppressor something. So in the end, I was happy with it, but it was a process. It was a real long process.
So do you sit down with the pen and a piece of paper and just write down lots of different options, or how do you kind of?
I always try to have like pen and paper, and nowadays my phone too. And immediately, if I have an idea, I immediately write it down because you tend to forget. That was a learning process as well, because I have a lot of ideas just right before you fall asleep. You know, maybe you know it or maybe you recognize it. And you always think, oh, this is a great idea, I'm so going to remember it. And tomorrow I'll wake up and I'll be like, this is a great idea. And you just
gone forever.
Forget. And it's awful because you think, I had an amazing idea and I just don't remember. So it's a process, and sometimes I make mind maps and associate lots of, you know, with words, and I look up in the thesaurus, so I look up synonyms, and it's just a process of associating and like thinking, okay. And in the end, and sometimes you have a solution that you're like, okay, this is okay. It's the best we can do. It's
reminding me of I recently had to come up with a new name for a project, and you just sit down and you just write words and words and look up. Can you say it differently? Words to do with green. Okay, and so you just keep going.
And sometimes you end up quite far from the original, but then that is the best solution. So you have to let go sometimes of the original.
Is there a translation, again, a phrase or a word that you're the most proud of? Or it could be a whole book as well.
I'm pretty proud of the Hunger Games in general, because I'm really happy about the way it turned out, and it became so big, and it's really, I'm still really happy with the translation, and there is one thing in book 2 of the Hunger Games, Catching Fire, which might be my favorite one of the trilogy actually, and it's, if you've read it, you'll know it, and if you haven't read it, go read the Hunger Games. But it's there are two tributes from older games, Beatty and Mags, and they have nicknames, and the nicknames are Nuts and Volts. If you remember. Beatty is Volts because he does a lot with electrical wires and stuff, and Mags, she never really recovered from her Hunger Games, so she is Nuts. And Nuts and Volts is a pun on Nuts and Bolts, which is sort of like the essence or the basic 101 of something, but it also says something about who they are. So I had to find a translation that is both nuts and bolts.
So it's like a pear, but it has that meaning.
So it should be something together, and it has to have the right meaning for the both of them. So that was difficult, and also a lot of mind maps and a lot of associating, a lot of thinking for quite a few weeks. And then I came up with knetter and gek. For Dutch viewers, they will know what that means. Knetter has something to do with electricity. It's the sound it makes, like crackle. And gek means nuts, but knetter and gek together means knettergek means like
totally crazy.
And of course you lose the nuts and bolts connotation.
Like the mechanical side of it.
But still, it is something that totally goes together, and it also says something about. And it kind of works as an old duo that's been together. And the funny thing is that if you say, okay, he's knetter and she's gek, and then you immediately, as a Dutch reader, you think, hey, knettergek. That's funny. I think it's funny. And in A Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds, there are a lot of puns and a lot of wordplay because it's a free verse novel. And so it flows like a rap sometimes. It's really about sound and words that sound really the same but have a totally different meaning. And there are some solutions in there as well that I'm really happy with.
Puzzle it together.
And then if it works, you're like,
I did it. Of course, I'm gonna have to ask a question about Twilight.
Yes, of course.
People watching my channel might remember that I started on YouTube related to Twilight pretty much. I'm currently rereading Twilight for a video I'm filming with someone. But yeah, I wanted to just ask if you have any interesting anecdotes or memories or anything like that from when you were translating Twilight.
Well, when I started Twilight, of course, it wasn't the hype, not at all the hype it became later. So that was interesting. But when I first read Twilight, I worked in a children's book shop, and they sent it to the shop as for like an advanced reading copy. Like, you want to read it, maybe you guys, you're a big shop, and maybe you could have a read and see if it's something,
Right.
we
in the hopes
sell.
that you would start the English one, or
exactly. Or do you think this is something for the Dutch market?
Yeah.
And then my boss, she said, "Oh, Maria, maybe you should read this because
it's not my thing."
My thing." And I read it, and I remember that I read it, and I was like, "This is fantastic!" And of course, there's a lot we can say about Twilight now in retrospect, but at that moment, it really.
I mean, it is like you can say anything about Twilight, but it's so captivating.
Yeah. And it was, and I will never forget that first minute when I was reading in bed late at night, and I just couldn't stop. And I'd been such a long time that because I've read a lot of books for the shop as well and in my daily life as well, but it had been a long time that I've been that captivated by a book, and I was like, oh my god, I have to translate this. When I translated Twilight, it wasn't social media weren't that big, and we didn't
because it must have been
2000,
10 years ago?
Yeah, something 2007, I think, 6 maybe. I remember that when I started translating, I was so into forks, and then I went outside, to do some shopping or anything, and I was like, my god, you guys, you've got no idea where I just came from. It was a pretty intense translating
process.
Process, because I think it was one of my first books, so for me it was new as well, but I was so in forks and in the rainy, forest, and with Edward and Bella. What
would be your dream book to translate if you could pick one book?
I don't know, people often ask that question, but I think I'm pretty spoiled.
Okay, you were already doing them.
I've done such a lot of, great books. I love The Hunger Games, I love Twilight, and Frankenstein was a dream book as well, because I've known that it's been one of my favorite classics for so long. So I'm a bit afraid to jinx my career by saying, okay, this would be my dream book, because I'm doing dream books, I think.
Maybe my favorite question from Susie Moon, and she said, graduating from my language degree soon and looking to become a translator, and then in all caps, help.
There are a few ways, I think, to become a translator. I think a very good way to go is at least be visible to publishers, because I used to work in a children's bookshop. When I graduated, and I knew I wanted to be a translator, and so I was in touch with quite a lot of publishing companies already, and that made it easier for me to do. Of course, you always have to do like a trial translation to see, they have to know if you're any good. But it helps if you're visible in any way.
It's like any freelance job, I guess, where people need to know you exist.
You're a brand, so treat yourself as a brand.
So put it in your bio, put it in your LinkedIn.
And don't be afraid. If you think you're any good, you're any good. Be visible on Instagram, maybe do a blog or write reviews and show them that that you're capable of both translating and that you know what's going on in the publishing world. It could also help to work in a bookshop at the same time, but be there and be in the bookseller and the publishing world. And then you can write, of course, emails to the publishing companies you might want to work for. Find out who the editor is and try to be as specific as possible.
So where can people find that if they want that information? Is it on websites?
Usually it's on websites. You can also, if you cannot find it, just send an email to the general email address and ask for an editor's name. And
sometimes I feel like in the acknowledgements as well, they'll go off the back of books.
And try to get your email to that person, so
Yeah.
get it as specifically across as possible. And just say, okay, I've graduated, maybe you've done something during your studies, maybe you have some experience already, and mention that. And don't be afraid to, be proud of yourself. Don't say, oh yeah, hi, just graduated.
I might want to become a translator,
It would be really cool if you could give me just one
so you're just like,
tiny
I'm a
job.
translator, I'm available.
Just stand for who you are and for your work, I think. You have to have some luck, but maybe they just have a book available and they say, okay, translate a few chapters and we'll see if it works out. But be visible, be there, and be bold.
Should you have any sort of portfolio of little bits of translation you've done, or is that not very helpful?
Well, it's not very common because they will have a book for you to...
Right, so that's the test,
They
basically.
don't have time to read your portfolio, I'm afraid. But it always helps just list any experience that you have.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the last question is by Anna Mustachio. What does the day of a translator look like?
Oh, it might be a bit boring.
You sit and you translate?
Well, my day always starts with, usually I go to the gym in the morning for an hour or something to get my blood pumping. And then I have an office with other freelancers because I also have an office at home, but it gets a bit lonely and you only have the cat to talk to. I go there after the gym and sit down behind my computer. Start translating, and I do that all day,
and that's it.
Basically every day. And then I go home, so I work from 10 to 6, 7, something like that. And when I do my writing stuff, I do with Maarten in a different environment, but then I write all day. And sometimes, of course, I go to publishing companies if they have, a meetup for their translators and writers. That's like once a year for our publishing company. I'm writing and playing with words all day long and
so
being
nothing boring about it.
So I love it. I absolutely love it.
Is there any admin? So do you have a lot of emails or a lot of other admin that's related to it at all, or is it pretty straightforward?
Compared to other people, I think I don't get a lot of emails.
Okay, that's good. That's a good thing.
Because I like to focus and I like to work, and if I have too much distraction, then it doesn't work.
Okay.
I already get distracted if I have like 2 appointments in a day, like coffee with that person and lunch with another. It doesn't work for me.
You have to be really into it.
I like to work straight from all day long. It sounds a bit boring, but I think it's the best job in the world.
Alright, well thank you so much. Those are all the questions.
Okay.
I hope everyone got to ask all the questions they wanted. I think it's a profession you don't get to hear loads about. If people want to find you online, where can they find you?
They can find me on Instagram and on Twitter, same Maria_Postema. But feel free to send me a DM and I will always answer you.
Amazing. I'll put links to all the books we talked about in the description in case you missed any of them. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you next time.
Doei!